Good evening. After a two-day manhunt, 2 sleepless nights, law enforcement have apprehended Vance Bolter. That's 48 hours that law enforcement involved in a complex and dangerous manhunt. Spent Father's Day away from their families to deliver justice for Melissa and Mark Hortman and their children who spent this Father's Day alone.
That's Minnesota Governor Tim Walz confirming that Vance Bolter has been taken into custody after a 48-hour manhunt after he allegedly, or he is the one accused of, shooting dead Democratic State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark, as well as shooting Democratic State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette, but they have survived. One of the most senseless and disturbing acts of violence we've seen in a very long time, targeting lawmakers, clearly from what we're understanding about this guy based off of their political views. And then found in his car, Vance Bolter's, was a list of more lawmakers and abortion providers and people who were not aligned with him ideologically. That's what this seems to all be about. Here's the photographs of Vance Bolter being arrested. And now that he's in custody, we are learning more and more about him, what happened the night of these shootings, including the fact that before we didn't know he had gone to 2 more houses, but didn't end up getting into the homes in those cases of, again, Minnesota lawmakers. I can't imagine, number one, the absolute devastation for those around the Hortmans. And then, number two, for the lawmakers who found out that he showed up to their home and they just either weren't there or they didn't open the door, the fear of that is truly mind-bending. So because we went through the details you can find in the previous segment of the shooting itself and what we knew at that time, I want to give you a little bit of a summary again, but then get to what is immediately erupting as the political discourse, right? What was the motive? And normally, it becoming a political back and forth just feels so icky and such a distraction from the justice that is needed here, and something that we all should be able to unite around, which is the opposition to this and the horror at it. But instead, what we're seeing is, even as far as Republican senators, making fun of what happened. Making fun of 2 people being shot dead and 2 others injured brutally. So we do need to clarify this individual's political motivations that are becoming abundantly clear and, contradicting what Elon Musk and others are trying to say. This was not a left-wing shooter targeting Democrats. It indeed was a Trump supporter.
We even asked about Mr. Bolter's political affiliations, and David Carlson, once again his roommate and best friend, known him since 4th grade, did say Bolter voted for Trump and that he was a strong supporter.
Whenever we got initial information about him and the list, and we went through the details of it, ABC News reporting the suspects list include dozens of other Democrats from Minnesota, including Governor Walz, Ilhan Omar, Tina Smith, Attorney General Keith Ellison, etc. You had a pretty good guess as to what his political motivations were going to be. And this was, from the beginning of the investigation, assumed to be a politically motivated attack. But something that is so wildly unnecessary, like if a left-winger does an act of violence, I'm against it, and I'm not lunging to figure out why it was MAGA's fault. But here, they're just lunging in action to say this was somehow actually a lefty, which is so unnecessary. And we'll get to what I brought up, the Republican Senator Mike Lee, what I'm so disturbed by in the aftermath of this. But first, here is the roommate of Vance Bolter reading the last text that was sent before the shootings.
Dead shortly. So I just want to let you know that I love you guys both, and I wish it hadn't gone this way. I don't want to say anything more and implicate you in any way, because you guys don't know anything about this. But I love you guys, and I'm sorry for all the trouble this has caused. He was a loving, caring guy, loved his family, loved his friends, and loved God, and I don't know why he did what he did. It's not Vance. No one will believe this. No one that grew up. He had lots of friends, trust me. And I wish I could have been there to stop him.
Yeah. Here's some more images ABC News showing to give you a sense of the accused. And this photograph here, the third one over from the left, he wore one of those like Halloween skin masks where you can pull it over your face and it looks like an old man's face. And then he was in the police outfit. As we went through before, had a car that had police gear, lights, even license plate, if I'm not mistaken. And in every way looked like, a police officer is walking up to my door with a flashlight. Of course I should open it. Unbelievable. Now, with that being said, what am I referring to in terms of MAGA figures online doing what as someone who has covered acts of violence against people that I don't like, for example, the assassination attempts against Trump, I'm not coming from a place of, well, I don't know what it's like to have to respond to I do. And my response, you all remember, was no matter what I think of Trump, this is terrible. And in the case of one of the shooters, it was clearly an ideological anti-Trump political motivation. So I said that. The other shooter, we went through the specifications of his. And it's terrible and we oppose it no matter what, right? So it's actually really easy. It's not difficult. But apparently for them it is. Elon Musk, right in the wake of this shooting, as the manhunt was still going on, said the far left is murderously violent. And then Mike Lee, who is a Republican senator, said this is what happens when Marxists don't get their way, with the photo of allegedly Vance Bolter out in front of one of the houses in that creepy mask and a police outfit. Which this is every single person's worst nightmare right here. And the fact that our political moment is so utterly demented that someone could walk up in the circumstances that took place that night and do this to people based off of political differences is the worst of what you can imagine politics to be. And then again, Republican Senator Mike Lee posted the photos of Vance Bolter and said nightmare on Walt Street. Referring, I guess, to Tim Walz. Making a joke of it with 15,000 likes. Now, what does a normal person read that as? He's making fun of it. Two people are dead, and he's making fun of it. Maybe he would say, I'm making fun of how violent leftists are. Which even if this guy was a leftist, which he's not, we've now learned. I have more video of the roommate confirming that. But even if he were, still not funny. Still terrible. And then Trump said, well, it's a terrible thing in response to the shooting. But then said, I think he's a terrible governor, talking about Tim Walz. I think he's a grossly incompetent person. But I may call him. I may call other people too. Immediately calling Walz a bad governor when asked if he would call him. Walz's name was on this list. Walz was friends with the Hortmans. And that's Trump's first thought. Lilia Luciano said, just spoke with Vance Bolter's roommate, David, who told us he was very conservative and would be offended if people thought he was a Democrat, as some had assumed. Why? I don't know why they assumed that. That he was a fan of InfoWars, that he voted for and was very happy President Trump won the election. Yeah, this isn't shocking news. Here's the video confirming this.
Can you talk about his politics a little bit? I know that we had some discussions. I just wanted to talk.
Well, everyone's calling him a Democrat. He's not a Democrat. He would be offended if people called him a Democrat. Because of this board thing he was on for Governor Walz, it wasn't to serve. He was just serving the community. But I can't believe a political issue would cause him to do such a thing.
Did he ever bring up the senator or the representative who were targeted?
Like I was saying, no, he never talked about those. I didn't know those. I didn't recognize her name.
Any politicians he mentioned?
Nancy Pelosi, didn't like Jim Walz. Jim Walz? Didn't like Jim Biden. But Tim Walz.
Why is everyone Jim? Jim Walz and Jim Biden? But you get the point. He's trying to say he didn't like those Democrats. Given the list that he had, yeah, I think we could assume that. And then it's being confirmed there. So you heard him mention the board. I guess, I don't know why I always feel the need to go to such crazy extents to rationalize the irrational. But I guess if you got confused as a MAGA person, it could have been because of headlines like this from the New York Post, saying Minnesota gunmen sought in deadly shootings of lawmaker, her husband, identified as former appointee of Tim Walz. To which someone said, genuinely crazy how conservative media is reporting on this story. It's a random advisory board. Appointments to those are usually far less politicized. So even the roommate was saying that wasn't really a political thing. He just worked for the government. And so technically the governor's the one who staffs all those things. But it was a politically, ideologically diverse advisory board of like 60 members, and it was a workforce development thing. But they try to make it like close aid of Walz, which is not at all what it was. In response to Elon Musk saying the far left is murderously violent, someone named Sam said, the way the far right is blatantly lying and trying to blame the assassination of 2 Democratic politicians on Democrats is one of the most disgusting things I have ever seen. Yeah, there are certain moments in politics that make you really lose faith in people. And this is one of them. I think none of us can really get our head around why someone would do what allegedly Vance Bolter did. That's one element. But we can kind of say, okay, some people are mentally deranged in some way. And so his political persuasion and some snapping of mental derangement and radicalization caused him to do the worst of humanity. Still, that doesn't really resolve it, but you think, I can put some individual bad actors into a category over here of crazy. But what makes it harder to just move forward with our political discourse is then all of the Elon Musk, Mike Lee, a bunch of just influencers, you might not know the names of them, but relevant, influential MAGA influencers. They're all over here who we engage with on a daily basis in our political discourse, willing to do what rhetorically is the worst of the worst in politics. And disgusting. Here's more from a press conference, filling in some of the details about this shooting.
Belter went to the homes of 4 Minnesota state politicians with the intent to kill them. Belter first traveled to the home of Minnesota State Senator John Hoffman in Champlin, Minnesota. Belter arrived at the senator's home disguised as a police officer. He arrived in a black SUV with emergency lights turned on and with a license plate that read police. Belter wore a black tactical vest and body armor. He carried a flashlight and a Beretta 9mm handgun. He also wore a hyper-realistic silicone mask. Senator Hoffman had a security camera. I've seen the footage from that camera, and it is chilling. Belter knocked on Senator Hoffman's front door and repeatedly shouted, "This is the police, open the door." Senator Hoffman and his wife, Yvette, came to the door. When they opened the door, Belter shined the flashlight in their faces and said there had been a shooting reported in the house. Belter asked if they had any weapons. When Belter lowered his flashlight, which he had shined in their face, they realized that he was not a police officer. They shouted out, "You're not a cop. You're not a police officer." Belter then announced, "This is a robbery," and forced himself into their home. When Senator Hoffman attempted to push Belter out and stop him from entering his home, Belter shot him repeatedly. Belter then shot Miss Hoffman repeatedly. Belter fled the scene, and the Hoffman's daughter called 911. Unfortunately, the Hoffmans survived, although they remain hospitalized.
So just to give you a sense of the utter nightmare that was. All right, last detail I want to show you. We could spend an hour just ranting on the responses to this and the heartbreak of it, but this is one of the details I referenced, which is that 2 other homes were visited we didn't previously know about.
After shooting Senator Hoffman and his wife, Belter traveled to the home of another Minnesota state representative in Maple Grove, Minnesota. Video surveillance showed that Belter rang the doorbell at the state representative's house at approximately 2:24 a.m. on Friday night. Again, he was dressed as a law enforcement officer, wearing a tactical vest and body armor, carrying a handgun and a flashlight, and wearing that same hyper-realistic silicone mask. Again, the images, as you can see on the screen, are haunting. Now, fortunately, the state representative was not home. She and her family were gone on vacation, and so Belter left. Belter then traveled to the home of a Minnesota state senator who lived in New Hope, Minnesota. He parked in the street in that same black SUV with the police license plate. At about 2:36 a.m. on Friday night, after learning of the shooting of Senator Hoffman, New Hope police dispatched an officer to conduct a wellness check on the state senator who lived in New Hope. When the New Hope officer arrived at the scene, she saw Belter's black SUV parked down the block with the lights on. The New Hope police officer believed that Belter was a police officer who had been dispatched to the scene to check on the status of the state senator. The New Hope police officer pulled up next to Belter in his car, rolled down her window, and attempted to speak with him. Belter did not respond. According to the officer, he just sat there and stared straight ahead.
So, again, just to sort of wrap up on this. I'm a person, right? Mike Lee's a person. I don't know how another person thinks this response is appropriate. Nightmare on Wall Street, and this is what happened when Marxists don't get their way. Even though he's a Trump-supporting right-winger, anti-abortion, etc. And this is what I explained before, which is that you can find random people online saying anything about any event all the time. So that's not really a great barometer to figure out what the comparison between the two political infrastructures are. But if you look at people in some elected positions and compare the two sides, when Trump is attacked, every single elected Democrat never wavers in their clear and concise opposition to that violence. But when it's a Democrat, not just the influencers, but even the elected representatives themselves or senators themselves are willing to make light of it. It's like what we talked about with the Paul Pelosi attack and others. And that really contextualizes our political moment. One that can make you feel pretty helpless. So to close, obviously our hearts and pain is with the Hortmans, and we wish the best for the Hoffmans' recovery.